Say hello to my little friend. On July 1st, 1963, the post office introduced the zip code to the American public, and to help encourage people to utilize those 5 digits on their mail, they enlisted the aid of this little guy whose name is Mr. Zip. Now, although Mr. Zip became famous by being used by the Postal Service in their advertising campaigns, he was not actually created by them. He was actually created by the ad agency for Chase Manhattan Bank. Back in those days, in the early 60s and before, people would pay their bills, their light bills, their electric bills, their gas bills, their telephone bills, by driving to those offices and paying in person. I remember myself going with my parents when they went out to pay the bills. And Chase Manhattan Bank utilized this mail carrier cartoon figure to encourage people to pay their bills by mail. And of course they would do that by utilizing checks from their checking accounts, hopefully opened at Chase Manhattan Bank. Now, Chase only ran that campaign for a couple of years, then they retired that mailman character. AT&T, the telephone company, then acquired the rights to the little character from Chase Manhattan Bank, and I haven't been able to figure out what they used him for at that time. But soon after that, the post office, the U.S. Postal Service, or the Post Office Department at that time, contacted AT&T for some assistance. Some executive at the post office was familiar with the executive at AT&T. They were they were buddies, and so they got together, and the post office asked for assistance on how they could advertise zip codes and encourage people to use it. Because it was about that time, well, it had only been 10, 12 years earlier, AT&T, or the telephone system, had introduced area codes. And also, earlier, when making a phone call, you might have seen these old black and white movies where someone grabs the phone, "Operator, get me Gramercy 5433. Gramercy was the name of the telephone exchange. Well, by the early 60s, the telephone company had gone to using all digits. So when you dial the number, you didn't dial Gramercy 5433. Now it was just, now it was, I'm punching buttons, but of course back then it was dials. So anyways, they went to all numbers, all digits. And then along with the area codes, people had kind of a blowback against numbers, because it was about this time also that Social Security numbers became ubiquitous in, you needing to give your Social Security number for this account and for that account. And there was even an anti-digit, or I think it was called an anti-digit league, that formed because of the pervasive use of numbers. And their battle cry was, "I am not a number." So anyways, one day AT&T showed up at the post office, and they told them about this mailman character, which they called Mr. P.O. Zone, and suggested they utilize him in their ad campaign to push the new zip codes. Well, the post office loved the idea, except they hated the name. And since the new coding system was called Zone Improvement Plan, they decided this mailman's name was going to be Mr. Zip. And as I said, in 1963, the post office introduced the zip codes, and they And Mr. Zip started appearing in advertisements all over the place. Advertisements in print, in magazines, on TV commercials, in posters in the post offices. They created a 4-page comic book featuring Mr. Zip. And there was even a zip code board game. Last two items, the comic book and the board game, they were, of course, geared more towards children, and that was their intent. The post office wanted to get children involved too, where the children might remind Mommy and Daddy, don't forget to use your zip codes. And then the children would grow up using zip codes, and there would be no problem convincing them to use it. They even had television ads with zip code jingles. One famous one featuring Ethel Merman singing a zip code song to the tune of Zippity Doo Dah. There's another clip of this group called the Swinging Six singing a zip code song. And you can see both of those clips. They're available on YouTube. I've left a link to those videos in the description below. Check them out. And help came from outside of the official advertising channels in pop culture. The pop group, the Five Americans, had a number 5 hit single with the song Western Union, which you can find a link to down below. They followed up that song with a record called Zip Code. And you can find a link for that in the description. So then, now we come to the part that concerns stamp collectors. Along with the rollout of the zip codes, the post office started placing images of Mr. Zip on the stamp sheets in the margins in the selvage. As with the plate numbers, they appeared once on each pane of stamps in a corner. And also, as with the plate numbers, where collectors collected blocks of 4 that they call plate number blocks or simply plate blocks, collectors started collecting the blocks, the corner blocks of 4 that showed Mr. Zip. And thus a new stamp collecting area was formed, the collection of zip blocks. Mr. Zip also appeared on stamp booklets on the covers, as well as on the inside stamp pane as one of the extra stamps, a dummy stamp or a placeholder. Over the years, Mr. Zip has appeared in 4 different poses on the sheets. There's his original hunched over, zipping along pose. Then there's one where he's standing upright with his arm outstretched. And then some stamp sheets had very narrow selvage strips, and they made a very thin, upright, arms at his side Mr. Zip figure to fit that selvage. And then some stamps just featured a headshot of Mr. Zip. All of these Mr. Zip figures can be found along with the slogan, "Use Zip Code." However, the hunched over Mr. Zip and the arm outstretched can also be found with the slogan, "Use correct zip code." Now, Mr. Zip appeared on a vast majority of the stamp sheets issued during his run. However, for some odd reason, in 1973, the post office issued this stamp noting the 10th anniversary of the implementation of zip codes. And for some odd reason, they left him off of the stamp sheet. He doesn't appear anywhere. And if that's not bad enough, by the 1980s, he had done his job. He got everyone using zip code. The use of zip codes had become ubiquitous, and Mr. Zip had worked himself out of a job. And as of the last stamp of 1985, Mr. Zip had made his last appearance on a stamp sheet, and he was put into retirement by the post office. That is until the year 2013. the 50th anniversary of the zip code. Mr. Zip was brought out of retirement and was utilized on two stamps, two high-value stamps at that. This $5.60 stamp showing the Arlington Green Bridge, Scott number 4738, and also on Scott 4739, a $19.95 stamp depicting Grand Central Terminal in New York. Now, as you can see by looking at the pane, there's no Mr. Zip there, right? Well, you got to turn it over. They placed him on the back. Sometimes it's hard to understand the post office's marketing philosophies. First, they completely leave him off the 10th anniversary zip code stamp. And then for the 50th anniversary, they just relegate him to the flip side of the sheet. I tell you, he don't get no respect. Now, if you want to form a Ziploc collection, that's a very achievable goal. For one thing, he appeared only for 22 years, although he is on most of the stamps during those 22 years. And the total number of blocks you need to form a complete collection is 385. That's a large enough number to form an impressive collection and give you a sense of achievement after you've completed it. Yet it's small enough that you're not going to go broke completing it, especially since being so old, and back in the 60s, you're talking about 5 cent, 6 cent, 8 cent stamps that even in blocks of 4 only go for less than double of face value. For a complete list by Scott catalog number of all the stamps that Mr. Zip has appeared on, you can go to this website called mrzip.club, which of course I've placed a link in the description below. On that site, you will also find a lot of historical information about Mr. Zip, which I wasn't able to include in this video. So that, in a nutshell, is the story of Mr. Zip. Thanks again for joining me in this episode. If you liked it, I hope you'll hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. I'm trying to get to 5,000 now. I'm almost there. And hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of when the next episode goes up. So thanks again, and until next time, happy stamping.